No, I didn't know I was adopted until later on in life. I was actually about 16, 17 years old. What happened was my stepfather at that time was a collector of guns, and somebody broke into our house and ransacked it and dumped everything out of the drawers and everything else. Now, my parents were out of town at the time, so I wanted to try to pick up as much as I could before they came home because it was just a complete mess. And in straightening up some papers and some drawers upstairs, I ran across the adoption papers that had my name on them.
For 3 decades, thousands of stories were given life in our print room before being sent to your home. Each week, an individual walks into this room to give life to an incredible, one-of-a-kind story. These aren't your local politicians or well-known celebrities. They are everyday people, much like yourself, eager to share a piece of their lives with you.
Oh, absolutely, it was a surprise. I sat there for a while and looked at it because I couldn't believe it. I had never had any inclination, nobody had ever said anything, grandparents, family. It was quite the shock. I just sat there for a while and looked at the papers and then decided, well, there was obviously a secret. I didn't know why, I didn't know what for. My adopted father had already passed away, and my mother still remained very involved with his mother, so my grandmother. So I figured there was something there, and I just let it go. I just went ahead and carried on with life. I think where it probably she had the best indication that I knew something was when my grandmother, my adoptive father's mother, passed away. I was named the executor of the will, and I was 22, 23 at the time. During the process of reading the will, when my aunt realized that she wasn't going to get what she thought she was going to get, her son blurted out that blood was thicker than ink. So that was the first indication I had, because I could feel everybody looking at me to see what my response was going to be, and my aunt even kind of nudged her son like, shut up. But I just kept going forward like, I hadn't heard it. I just kept moving on. As time went on, it got, I don't want to say it got strained between my mom and I, but we didn't talk as much. So I think we were both wondering what the other person knew at that point. So I had, something had came up, I can't recall what it was, at work or whatever, for her that she was very depressed with. So I had purchased something for her that I was going to give her for Christmas. It was a couple months away, but I went ahead and brought that down to her. And she was looking at that, and I think at that point she kind of started putting 2 and 2 together, and she said, what do you know? And I said, well, I saw the papers. So I said, I don't know that much, only what I could read from the adoption papers. At that point in time, actually, she gave me an envelope which had a letter from my birth mother. It gave me an opportunity to have a few more conversations with her, but she didn't really know that much about the people, my birth parents, that much. So at that time, she had indicated to me that they were sharecroppers and work in the fields up in Tehachapi in the agricultural business. I think in the back of my mind I was always wondering if they were alive and how they were doing, if they were okay or not. One evening, I sometimes have a hard time sleeping at night, so I got up, and I'm not a big junkie of Facebook, but I got onto Facebook. I knew the last name, so I went ahead and started looking up for a last name of Nash, and then I broke it down to Nash and Tehachapi, and I did find a person there. His name was Larry Nash, and I thought, well, looking at ages, dates of birth, and everything else, I said it could be a brother. He's very close to me in my age. He's about 7 years older. So I thought that was a possibility. And I let that lay for a few days. I really didn't know if I wanted to open that door. It was still something I was a little bit nervous about. But I went ahead and posted a message to Larry, and he replied back that I should give him a call. So he gave me his phone number. So it was probably a couple days after that, I went ahead and called Larry and was discussing with him. I told him that my parents' name, and he said, well, I have a brother that had that name, and his wife's name was Mary. But he said they never gave up any children for adoption. So at that point in time, he said it seemed so close because, I mean, the names were right, the locations were right, but it just, that one last little cog wasn't, that piece of the puzzle just wasn't fitting in. I'm at work and my phone starts going off, my work phone starts going off. And I was in a meeting, so I pulled out my phone and just sent it to message, and it immediately started ringing again. And I put it on message, and the third time it started ringing, I said, this must be an emergency or something. I better step out and take the call. So I took the call, and it was somebody at one of the other offices, and she said, we had just got the strangest phone call. And I said, well, I've worked here for 25 years now, there is no such thing as a strange phone call. And she said, well, I think this one is. So I'm sitting there, I go, well, what is it? And she says, well, a lady just called and she said she's your sister. And I said, oh. I said, what was her name? And she gave me the name, Joyce Nash Hill. And I just paused. I kind of sucked all the air out of me, and I just sat there for a second kind of looking around going, okay, well, Nash is in the name. And as luck would have it, when I got home, because I don't go on Facebook that often, there was a friend request from this individual. I asked her, I said, so how did you get in touch with me? Because it's been a couple of years since I reached out. And she had said that they were putting together a family reunion, which apparently they do every year now in Missouri, which is where the family's from. And she had contacted the uncle in Tehachapi to see if he would be able to come this year. And he said no. And he said, but I had the strangest phone call a couple of years ago by this person that said he was family. And she said, my God, that's my brother. And he says, what brother are you talking about? So she at that point began to tell him the story that the day that I was born, the parents had came home a couple of days later and said that I had died during childbirth. So nobody in the family knew that story, or they knew that story, they didn't know anything about adoption. So nobody believed it other than this older sister who was told by the babysitter, who was a friend of the nurse at the hospital, that no, I did not die, I was given up for adoption. I have two older sisters and one older brother, and after that marriage ended, she had 5 other boys. So there's actually, going from being an only child to actually having 8 brothers and sisters. Wow. When the parents went to the hospital, the babysitter had told the oldest sister, who was 6 at the time, that they were going to have a baby. And then the story came back that I had died during childbirth, but yet the oldest sister was told, no, he did not. A couple years after that, the lady who told her before came back and said, do you remember what I told you? And she said, yes, I do. So she knew all of her life that I had been born and that I was alive. The other brothers and sisters went ahead with what the parents had said, that I had died, and just didn't think another thought about it. You know, the circumstances of me being adopted are really still unclear. There was the indication that the parents had, well, there wasn't an indication, the parents had told the children that I had died during childbirth. We don't know why. I can only surmise that it was probably a financial situation, and they just couldn't afford me. And I'm going to say that they probably felt that I would have a better life being adopted by somebody that could afford to give me things. And I did have that lifestyle. My parents were doted on me quite a bit. I red hair, you know, little tuxedo and the whole thing. So I did have a very good life, and I'm very thankful for that. And at times, since finding out that I was adopted, I've had some feelings of guilt, both for not being there with my birth family and trying to help, because it doesn't sound like everything was rosy there. But you know, and now being adopted, I feel a little bit of a guilt towards my adoptive parents. So I have had conversations with them. They've passed, but I've had, you know, conversations with them to let them know that they will always be my parents. So that, to me, is very important for me.